Hey, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. It may be December, but let's be honest. It's never too early to talk about cash cows and your AFL fantasy and SuperCoach sides for 2025. The positions are out. The prices, well, at time of recording, are imminent and no formats are officially open. But regardless, there is still a ton of stuff we have to talk about. On this episode, we are going to look at the rookies, the cash cows, the valuable cash generators that are going to ultimately be the core reason you get to that completed side as fast as it possibly can. Joining me on this episode, though, a special guest. If you checked out YouTube and searched AFL Draft at any point of time over the last 6 months, chances are you saw this guy's content. He was a genius right throughout this off-season period, helping people understand exactly just how good this draft crop could be. But it wasn't just an understanding of the under-18 talents. It was then the ability to brilliantly connect that with gaps in AFL teams' lists and bring it all together. You've seen his mock drafts. If you searched AFL Draft, you've definitely run into him. If you haven't, you're going to want to. Dylan Alexander joins us on the Coaches Panel. Mate, nice to see you and keen to talk about this pretty impressive draft crop it seems to be.
Hey, MJ, thanks for having me on. I think now that I'm getting into the fantasy content, now that I've actually really peaked, like this is probably for me, like this is the most fun I have in football doing, your fantasy, your super coach stuff. So I'm honored to be on. And yeah, thanks for the kind words there at the start.
We want to get into this crop of kids in a moment and look at, we're going to rank them. Everybody that listens to the Coaches Panel knows I love the phrase most relevant, knows I love a countdown. So Dylan's been very kind to give us the top 10 rookies from a fantasy perspective for this upcoming draft. We're going to work our way through them in a moment. But if you haven't checked out Dylan's channel yet, can I encourage you to do so? The link's in the bio. Make sure you do it. Because, mate, you haven't just done some great analysis around this draft crop. Something you're doing at the moment is you're taking people through some list analysis side and a greater understanding of what clubs are journeying through at the moment too.
Yeah, I think that's been like a focus for me coming into it. I thought that there was draft content out there when I sort of started in this space, but I think there is that gap between what actually clubs looking for sort of specific type players to fill roles. So that was something that I really tried to tap into. And I think that goes hand in hand with the fantasy stuff because you can really try to predict what a player is going to be like by kind of seeing the gaps in the squad. And I think you can even sort of predict drafting in a sense in that way. If there's certain statistics that a club's really lacking in, something like meters gained or something like that, and they need to get that more sort of aggressive midfielder into the mix or someone off half back, I think that's how you kind of need to be looking at it and how clubs are looking at it. And I think that can kind of paint a picture. And I think that's how, if we go through these fantasy players today, we can sort of use that as some backing.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. So, we've got 10 players I want to look through. Really, we've got a couple of criteria. We're going to let Dylan loose on helping for you if you're like, who are these kids and how good a player could they be? He'll give us some understanding around that and really put that in a framework. But we're really looking at a couple of core different elements to sit right throughout this episode. We're looking at a player's probability and likelihood for games played. We know that about the rookies and the cash cows that we've got, that if they're not getting opportunities to play games, ultimately there's no opportunity to score, to generate cash, and to do some fine work from us through there. Sitting alongside that is the opportunity at the club that they've landed, their scoring pedigree as a junior, and ultimately, do they find themselves sitting in a fantasy-friendly role? These are kind of the overarching criteria we've got ourselves locked away for this episode. So, 10 players. We've got you to put them in an order for us, Dylan, of who, using that kind of framework, using your draft knowledge, what they've got as that fantasy pedigree as a junior, and then also the clubs they've landed at, putting that together to give us a list. This is one of the biggest draft groups we've seen for a really, really long time. And so to limit you to just 10 players feels unfair. So let's cheat a little bit. Who was one that just missed the top 10 list for you? Who's like 10A if we were to go there?
Yeah. So all of those things that you just said, I think they're really important. I've sort of found, looking over a bit of data from the past few seasons, players that have succeeded really well when they first come into the AFL, they usually have a high degree of positional flexibility. And quite often they're sort of endurance-based athletes. So I think the first guy, although he's not a huge winner of the football, and that's why ultimately he has missed out, but I think Bo Allen to West Coast, I think this one, as far as the opportunity to actually slot in and play some football, just sort of works really well. He's got that sort of rangy athleticism. He's probably going to start, most likely as a bit of a half-backer, someone that can sort of intercept the football. He'll probably play a little bit of lockdown. Like he played for Peel Thunder this season in the seniors, and he only averaged around 11 disposals. So I don't think you're going to get enormous amount of output from this guy. But I think West Coast will use him in, sparingly throughout the midfield. He's a big tackler when he plays in there. And when he did play midfield for both, like in the under-18 football for the Colts and in the national championships, he averaged over 20 disposals as a midfielder. So more of a probably impact per possession player at this stage, and that's ultimately why he's missed out on the list, but somebody that we can still kind of, have a bit of a sniff around for sure.
Yeah, so maybe a little more SuperCoach favoured with some of that impact per possession, some of that strong disposal efficiency he's got through there, some intercept elements and scoring with that, some of that marking skill he's got. So it's an option for both. Let's not be wrong here, but maybe a little more SuperCoach bent. It sounds like you're kind of leading us towards.
Yeah, and I think given the quality of our midfielders that we have, the fact that he's got defensive eligibility, just sort of like it puts him up a little bit, of course. But I mean, you'd love it if he had, say, forward status. That would be the holy grail.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, ultimately, I think he's not someone that he's not going to be a must-have.
Yeah.
But and in this wide draft crop, he probably just doesn't make that top 10. I'll move on to my number 10.
Yeah.
If you want me to start here.
Let's go. You've hit the forward lines for us, which is nice. Who have you got at number 10 for the most impactful rookies we could see in SuperCoach and Fantasy for 2025?
So I've got a couple here. I've got two forwards at 10 and 9. And I don't think they are going to be, if you look at their numbers throughout their junior career, they're not super high numbers, guys. They are more impact per possession. At number 10, I've got Isaac Kako. I think there's probably never been a better combination of like academy player and football club I've seen with Isaac Kako and Essendon. He's the perfect player that they need. They had so many problems this season keeping the ball inside their forward 50. They want to play that forward half game, but they just don't apply enough pressure. So it's so easy for teams to transition the ball coming out of that defensive 50. And I think Isaac Kako is going to shore them up so much there. He can operate in those tight spaces. His score involvements per disposal were unbelievable throughout the season. He kicked around 25 to 30 goals in the Coates Talent League, and he was sitting around, like in a game of football, he'd have about 15 possessions, say at the national championships, and 9 of them would be score involvements. So that's the degree to which this guy touches the footy and it sort of turns to gold. He's really lethal around goal. He's really powerful as well, and he has been a player that can run through the midfield. And I think Essendon, given how important he's going to be in the long term to their team, I think they're going to give him every opportunity. I don't think we're going to see like a Sheasel, small forward to half back situation with Isaac Kako, but I think he's going to get stints in the midfield and give you just that solid bench forward rookie.
And I was going to ask about that because often these kind of small pressure forwards, and that's not all Kako is, that's definitely one of his hallmarks, is they become really capped in their scoring capacity where it's tackles and goals is really their only way. But you're saying there's an avenue you could see. It might only be a centre bounce rotation or 2 per half or pushing up the ground during quarters, but you're saying there's a pathway in this Essendon side where maybe there's some up the ground scoring that could come Isaac's way.
He certainly has the endurance base to be able to play in higher positions. I think, generally speaking, and I think how Essendon will utilise him will be a little bit deeper. I mean, think about someone that plays in the AFL already. Think about that sort of Tom Papley type player where he comes in, he has a few centre bounces and impacts, and he'll get some tackles through that as well. But you will be looking, like I can't see Isaac Kako averaging, say, 80 in AFL fantasy or something like that. He's just not going to get the sheer weight of numbers behind him. But again, as far as a lot of these rookies, half the battle is just getting in the team and cementing themselves in the team. And I think he's a player that's sort of ready to go. And you probably have to start him in your team just because of, the forward line, how that kind of shapes up. And you don't want to miss out too, if he was to sort of get a more favourable role, and they might swing him around just for developmental reasons as well. But definitely, I mean, at heart, he's a small forward.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. You've also got another forward in for us. I think there's only 2 inside your top 10 that have forward status. The beauty is there's a lot of value in our forward lines and not a lot of top-end premiums that we're really considering too deep. So that's helpful for us. But you've given us another forward in Joe Berry at Port Adelaide. They seem pretty happy to land this kid. Talk to us a little bit about him and how you think he's going to sit into this forward line.
Yeah, I actually read an article from Cal Toomey just last week, and he was talking about how many teams were actually interested in trying to climb up the board to get this guy. He's a very mercurial player, played at the Murray Bushrangers in his Coates Talent League football, and he's just so exciting to watch. He's one of those small forwards that has, elite pace. He has those same features that I talked about with Isaac Kako, probably a little less powerful. Like, he doesn't have that strength and power to be able to burst through, but he has a lot of pace. He has a lot of evasiveness when he's operating inside forward 50, but he has a bit bigger tank, so he can get higher up the ground, kind of play more of a, if you think about an AFL player, a prototype, think about someone like a Dylan Moore, who gets a little bit higher up the ground, gets involved in stoppages, and is going to get a little bit more of the football, which is ultimately, got me putting him at number 9 there. But I think more importantly, again, coming into this Port Adelaide side, we saw what happened with them in the final series. Their forward line really broke down, and I think the only small forward that was really operating for them was, say, like a Willie Rioli. So they need extra numbers in there, and Joe Berry's, high-end talent, his pedigree means that he's going to get plenty of opportunities in there. And I can see, again, you look at their midfield group, it's really strong, and I think they're going to want to get someone like a Jason Horne-Francis to even more centre bounces than he attended last year. He's really dangerous in the forward 50, but Joe Berry can probably play a little bit of that Horne-Francis role just with that sort of, burst of pace that he has. And this guy, he's so good overhead as well. So he could take mark of the year and kick a ground level goal that wins goal of the year, just to sort of look at the package. So he's that type of forward that every team is ultimately looking for. It's the, small hybrid, if you want to give that sort of position a name.
Yeah.
I'm from just a pure football perspective, I'm super excited about this guy. As far as from a fantasy super coach, I think anyone that plays a small forward role is going to be maybe a little bit more suited to like a super coach. But given how flexible he is and given the endurance athlete that he is, I think there's more scope for a Joe Berry to win more of the football up the field.
Yeah, that's really helpful. How do you see the arrival of a Joe Richards in the off-season? They've previously given Mackenzie some opportunities through there. Is he just that good he's going to leapfrog some of these guys immediately in your eyes, or is it a little bit of a 50-50 battle to start round 1?
I don't think it's a 50-50 battle, just in the sense that the talent level of Joe Berry is too high. So I think what Port Adelaide are trying to do, they're trying to build, if we actually think about this Port Adelaide side, it's still quite young, as much as we have expectation on it because of the talent level of that midfield, your Butters, your Rosies, your Horne-Francises. They're still quite young. And so I think it's going to be really important for them as far as their next premiership tilt. It's going to be getting players in all positions that are that sort of talent level. They can't just have this amazing midfield and then, be robbing Peter to pay Paul in other positions. So they've looked to, target. They've got a key position player. They've got Jack Whitlock in the door as well. So I think they're really going to give these guys opportunities. Jack Whitlock, maybe not so much in the immediate time, just because he's a key position player. But I think Joe Berry, they have to get the development into him so that these guys are all sort of peaking around the same time.
Yeah, that's helpful. In at number 8, you've given us your first pure midfielder. Some were hoping that Champion Data might have allocated him mid-forward status. There's a high probability he'll probably get it as the season goes on with the DPP allocations. Melbourne's first pick in the draft, Harvey Langford. Anytime somebody uses the phrase plays like Dawson, plays like Bontempelli, the fantasy community start to froth a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. Probably the only difference between Harvey Langford and those two examples that were just given there in Jordan Dawson and Marcus Bontempelli, both of those players started, as juniors, they played as halfbacks.
Yeah.
And when you look at Harvey Langford, he's really never played that role, which is interesting because I think he could actually play that. He's really good overhead, so he could do the intercepting. He's got a high degree of footy IQ. So it's interesting that he hasn't been played in that role, and I would absolutely love to see it. If I had any inclination that he was going to be playing a halfback role at Melbourne, I would be absolutely all over him. But this guy disappointing that he didn't get forward status, just given how much football he played in the forward half of the ground throughout the season. I'm pretty surprised by that. At times for Vic Country, he was playing as a pure sort of third tall marking target. He's 190 centimetres, so he's a big, strong midfielder. Probably the thing that, I've marked him down for throughout the year is he doesn't have that like burst of pace. He's quite slow. Like he ran a 20-metre sprint in about 3.2 seconds, which is definitely on the slower end, but he does have really good endurance. He runs super patterns to be able to find the football. Pretty much any level that he played at, he averaged 25 touches, whether he was playing in the forward half of the ground or in the midfield. So he always gets his hands on the ball. He plays with an attitude as well. And, listening to some of the clips that Melbourne are putting out, they were really impressed with how much attitude that he's already shown at training. And again, we come back to the club. We look at what Melbourne are trying to do. They seem like they're going through this sort of transformative stage with, players like Christian Petrarca, with Clayton Oliver. We don't really know what's going to happen. Players like Trent Rivers have gone into the midfield. I think there's an opportunity for players like Caleb Windsor. What I think Harvey Langford's going to do, I think he's going to start as probably a third tall that pinch hits in the midfield. And I think if he, there starts to be green shoots and signs that he's playing well in the midfield, that opportunity is only going to grow for him.
I'm curious.
I think because of the...
No, you go. No, I was curious. What does that mean for a Christian Petrarca? Because I want to hear the rest of that thought, but I'm curious. You mentioned, and I agree with you, it's sort of Petrarca, Oliver, Viney, Rivers feel like the core four, and then some salt and pepper of some other guys. Do you see this releasing track more forward, or is it almost the inverse of that, is Langford forward actually means Petrarca can be more preeminent in the midfield?
The communications coming out of Melbourne are so interesting. Like, I reckon they've been one of the, for me, looking at it to try to analyse, they've been one of the biggest enigmas of the entire off-season, like what they were going to do in the draft. How do they see their midfield? You've got these two sort of big-bodied midfielders in Christian Petrarca and Clayton Oliver. Where do they see them in the mix of things? I think on some level they have to be looking to these guys that they've brought in, which, two midfielders that they have brought in Harvey Langford and Xavier Lindsay. They've got to be looking at them on some level to be replacing those guys. I think as far as how their forward line looks, it definitely means there's the opportunity there, at least to play Christian Petrarca as a bit more of a stay-at-home forward. I think their forward line over the last couple of seasons since that premiership win has looked more dangerous when he's down there. Whether that opens up more midfield time for a Harvey Langford, I'm not too sure, or whether it's just another player, like Rivers came in off the half-back line like we spoke about, and also like a Caleb Windsor, does he stay at the wing or does he come in? I think ultimately, and we'll probably talk about this as the podcast goes on, I think it's pretty difficult for rookie midfielders to come in and just play, 50, 60, 70% centre bounces in their first season. It doesn't happen that often. You get someone like a Harley Reid, who's a bit of a freak, but I always see that as more of an outlier than the norm. We saw what happened with players like Riley Sanders, who were those sort of stay-at-home mids. What Harvey Langford brings you with, because he's such a versatile player, he's a bit of a bigger body player, but he's also a marking player. I think you can play him as that third tall, and that's probably the selling point on him. I don't think you're going to get 20 plus touches from this guy often. He's going to be more impact, but the fact that he can roll through the midfield and does have, like I off the top, we're getting like pretty off track here, but off the top, we talked about the ability to potentially play across half back with some of the traits that he has. And I think if there's any sign that we've got to watch these preseason games really closely and sort of see what happens at training, the players that are going to go down with injury too, that are going to open up positions. And I think Harvey Langford's one that I've got here as a bit of a placeholder at number 8, but he sort of he could drop out of the top 10, but he also could be pushing up towards like a top 3 if the role was right.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the 10 so far, we're going from 10 to 1. Got Isaac Kako, Joe Berry, Harvey Langford. Maybe the first of, just so you know, there's a couple of surprises in Dylan's list here. So if you're a keeper league coach that's thinking who's going to be the best long-termer, or thinking, not to give anything away, Dylan loves a good swerve, as he should. There's some surprises in the final few to go. But at 7, I reckon someone, if you said, give us your top 3 most relevant rookies, they'd probably have this guy on paper as the top 3 name. But you got Sid Draper in at 7. No shade on Sid. Looks like an absolute star. But where did he get to 7 for you, and where do you think he's going to sit in this Crows midfield?
Yeah, I think the guys, like people have a natural tendency, if the guys played senior football, they want to put them up a little bit higher. I have people messaging me about this stuff with players like, for instant impact, players like Sid Draper, like Bo Allen, guys that actually played senior football. But I sort of look at it more from an archetypal perspective, how they fit into the AFL, what sort of role they're going to play. Sid Draper's an interesting midfielder because he's one that toes that line between sort of having a big engine and an endurance midfielder, but having that explosive burst of pace as well, more like someone like a Jason Horne-Francis, who it tends to be that sort of explosive, powerful midfielder takes a little bit longer to, particularly with fantasy, like get their numbers going from the get-go. So he's an interesting one. He can accumulate the football. Like he's had 30 possession games playing in, SANFL under 18s in national championships, but he's tended to be consistently more of like a 20 disposal guy, and that's playing in a full-time midfield role. So he tends to be a bit more of an impact per possession player. He's not, if we're talking about the differences between, say, SuperCoach and AFL Fantasy, he's not an absolutely beautiful kick of the football. He's more of a meters gain midfield. So he like drives with his legs out of stoppage, gets the ball deep inside forward 50, and then the team can sort of reset and go again. I see him, mainly I've got him at number 7 and not, say, lower. I've got him up this high because I do think that there is a role there for him in that Adelaide midfield. I think they're really going to try to regenerate things in there. We've seen Curtin. We've seen Jordan Dawson obviously come in from the half-back line as well. I sort of think Sid Draper, along with Jake Saligo coming in as well, I think he's sort of the final piece because he's the real sort of turn of speed guy that they need in there. You've got the big bodies of Curtin and Dawson and the ball use of Dawson, but Draper gives you that fleet of foot around stoppage. He can get out of traffic and he's more that player. But I think in his first season, ultimately, you're not going to see big numbers, and there's not a lot of positional flexibility in his game. So I think if he's playing midfield, he's playing as a pinch hit midfielder, maybe a little bit forward, but I don't think he has the positional flexibility of some of the guys higher on the list if people are sort of wondering why he's this low. In the overall draft rankings, I had this guy as number 3 on my rankings list. So I do rate him as a player, but just see him a little bit more impactful at this point.
Yeah, and we're also, as you mentioned, taking into consideration the side that he's landed to, the opportunities for scoring, the favourability, and the market share of ball to be able to ultimately generate this SuperCoach and AFL fantasy scoring. So it's not just he's the 7th best likely prospect in 5-10 years' time. And maybe towards the end of the episode, I'll get hey, who do you think could become the really big dogs as once we get towards the end of the episode? But I think you've unpacked that episode, or the ideas around Draper really nicely. You mentioned this impact per possession, almost the personification. You've got that at number 6, as if there's one possession of any player in this draft crop that you go, with one touch, they could change the game. Arguably, another midfielder, Finn O'Sullivan, you've got at number 6.
I do have Finn O'Sullivan, and people are probably going to knock me for this because I'm a bit obsessed with him. And I'm a North Melbourne fan, so it's not actually because I'm a North Melbourne fan. I was obsessed with him from the midway point of the season. The first time I ever saw him play, I'm like, who is this guy? He just moves differently on the field. Sort of physiologically, he stacks up as a pretty normal-looking midfielder. He's sort of low 180 centimetre kind of guy, but he's got this sort of just rubbery nature to him. He can get out of traffic. He's really explosive as far as his pace. He ran a sub 3-second 20-meter sprint. So, like you said, with that high impact stuff, pretty much every time he gets the football, he bursts away, he evades, and he gets off like a beautiful disposal. His trouble has been sort of finding the football, I suppose, at his junior level and throughout this season. There have been some extenuating circumstances to that. He's had quite a lot of injuries throughout the season, little niggles and things that have just sort of kept him down. The main reason that I've got him at number 6 and ahead of someone like a Sid Draper and up there with some of these more accumulator types is just the fact that he's going to North Melbourne. And if you look at the last 2 seasons of top 10 draftees that they've brought into their team and players that, have that sort of that footy IQ of someone like a Finn O'Sullivan, look at the likes of Harry Sheasel, look at the likes of Colby McKercher. Now, again, as a junior, Finn O'Sullivan's played more as a midfielder and as a half forward, but those were the sort of positions that Harry Sheasel and Colby McKercher were taking up. Could we see and this is a big if, it's a big training watch. Could we see Finn O'Sullivan actually go into that sort of vacant Colby McKercher role that he was taking up? He pushes a little bit higher up the ground, and they just initiate again their nice new prize draft pick in Finn O'Sullivan, put him into that halfback role just so he gets a nice introduction, get the ball in his hands a little bit after a kind of disappointing year of junior football where he was injured a lot, and just sort of get him into the AFL. I know Caleb Daniel is going to be back there as well, so there is going to be a bit of a fight for positions. But this guy, North Melbourne wanted to trade this pick at the beginning of the trade period, and once they knew that Finn O'Sullivan was available, they basically kept it. So they've sort of ended up taking Finn O'Sullivan because they rate him so highly, and I think they're going to want to do everything that they can to bet him into this side.
I might tap into some of that North Melbourne perspective or knowledge for a second before we jump into who you've got at number 5, because a gift for us in SuperCoach and AFL Fantasy over the last 3 to 4 years hasn't just been that distribution role off halfback almost across the league, but for North Melbourne. You mentioned McKercher became a great rookie option for us when he gained defensive positional status. Harry Sheasel for the better part of the first 18 months of his AFL career before he moved more into the midfield for North Melbourne was a premium performer. Zach Fisher, when he did play in that back line, scored like a premium for us. And then before it was the likes of Zeeble and Hall. You've alluded to the fact, well, haven't alluded, you flat out said you kind of have Caleb Daniel on one of those distribution functions. Is Foss the next there, or is it going to be Powell, who has experimented a couple of times there last year? Does Zach Fisher get in? Are there others? A Hardiman who's had some opportunities through that? Where do you see these kind of distribution leads, which could for North Melbourne be really critical for us?
And that's the question. I mean, and that's what, like, the reason that he's at 6 and he's not higher. If I was absolutely sure that he was going to get one of those distribution roles, you know, I'd near have him at number 1 or number 2, just based on how, like you said, how lucrative they've been. North have been one of the worst teams in the competition for the best part of 5 years. But in the last 3 years, their fantasy stuff has gone through the roof just because of how much possession that they've had in the back half of the ground. So there's ball to be won back there. Like, ultimately, I don't know what they're going to do. As you said, you alluded to someone like a Riley Hardiman. I think he's a big watch throughout this preseason. And as far as a best position for Finn O'Sullivan, I think it is going to be midfield, half forward. You want him winning the ball in the forward half of the ground, not dissimilar to a Harry Sheasel, who they've moved up there. I just sort of, you know, watching Clarko over the last few seasons, he's really liked to do this with those high pedigree players. I think just more than anything, just to give them some confidence in their first year. So I think wherever he plays, whether it is one of those, you know, really juicy halfback roles, whether it's a little bit on the wing, the big thing with Finn O'Sullivan is how positionally flexible he is. I think he's the one draftee, the one midfielder in this crop that could just about play anywhere. You could play him like a 1-out forward in the goal square and he'll mark the footy. You could play him at halfback. He could probably play a lockdown role on a forward as well. So he, as far as ticking that box and being able to, you know, fit into holes, I think the scope of Finn O'Sullivan, of all of these players that we're talking about, probably the scope of how good and how bad he could be as a fantasy prospect is probably one of the biggest, and it's very role dependent. Ultimately, they all are, but yeah, I can't see them locking him away in a forward pocket. I think they're going to give him something just a little bit juicier than that.
Yeah, so he's going to be, while the positions are locked and the prices aren't yet out, he will be the second most expensive rookie option for us, being the number 2 pick behind Lawler. So if you do want to get your hands on him in your salary cap team, yeah, it's going to cost you a bit. But for draft, well, it's a whole different kettle of fish from that perspective. So 5 down, 5 to go, Dylan. We've got Kako, we've got Berry, we've got Langford, we've got Draper, and just talked about Finn O'Sullivan getting to the upper echelons of the most relevant cash cows from the 2024 draft crop, staying in the midfield, and a guy that as many as probably 4 months ago was the leading candidate to be the number 1 pick at Richmond, still lands there in the end. So happy days for Tiger fans. Josh Smiley, you've got in at number 5.
I do. I think this one, again, largely comes down to opportunity. I think he's the front runner of the players that they took in the draft this season, he's the front runner to be running out there in round one. You look at someone like Sam Lawler, who's had a lot of problems with injury, with the hamstring that he's carrying. He hasn't been able to train or anything like that. Josh Smiley's more, I think he was the player that they picked as that sort of safe bet, that ready to go kind of player. If you want a little bit of insight into how he plays, he's an enormous midfielder. He's 195 centimetres. He sort of plays like that when he's playing at stoppages. He's brutish. He's big. But I think the sneaky thing about Josh Smiley here again is the ball use. So he is a pretty smooth mover for a big guy. I think one of the best like descriptive or player comparisons I can find with Josh Smiley is someone like a David Mundy. If you remember back to the Freo player there, someone that's sort of bigger bodied, but he's not the most physical player that you can think of, say, compared to like a Dustin Martin or a Sam Lawler, who are sort of always trying to look for body contact, trying to push their way through. Josh Smiley he's a smooth mover. He's even rolled across for the academy games earlier in the season. He rolled across half back. And again, I think he's their sort of blue chip coming into this side, with Lawler taking a little bit longer. So I think they're going to give him all the opportunity they can. At stoppages, he's going to get his hands on the ball probably first, just due to the fact that he's got that extra bit of reach and he's got that sort of physicality in his game. He'll be playing with guys like Tim Taranto, like Jacob Hopper as well. But I think this one, as far as the impact at the beginning, I just think it's going to come down to how much Richmond want to bed him into the team, get his hands on the ball. And, Richmond, they're going to be in the bottom four this season. We pretty much know that from day dot. So they're going to give him all the opportunity, and whether it's at midfield, whether it's at halfback, I think he's going to score pretty well.
How do you see that Richmond? I know just recently on your channel you've done a video talking about Richmond and how they could avoid the wooden spoon. But how do you see this Richmond midfield dynamic work? Because Taranto, Hopper, Prestia when available, let's hope for his sake for Dion he gets a full season, but history is certainly against him from an injury legacy perspective to get through there. And then the likes of Lawler, Smiley, McAuliffe, a bit more of a defensive, but also an in and under style midfielder. How do you see this midfield shape taking place? Because on the surface, it looks clunky.
It's problematic. And I think the fact that it's problematic comes down to its lack of balance. It doesn't have those different types of midfielders in it. It doesn't sort of have your, like, Taranto's an accumulator, but he's sort of that bigger bodied sort of guy. He sort of hacks he's not a very controlled player in that sense. Hopper probably was that guy that had a little bit more pace, but he's had so many injuries now that he's slowing down. Prestia, again, more of an athlete in the early parts of his career, but his body just breaks down. All of those guys, they play the same way. And I think that opens the door for someone like a Josh Smiley, who doesn't necessarily give them the pace or the lateral movement that they need in there, but he's going to get opportunity. So I think, that's what's on his side. I think if a couple of other midfielders in this crop would have been absolutely amazing to fit into this Richmond midfielder. You think about guys like Finn O'Sullivan or like Jagga Smith. I think that probably from a needs point of view would have suited them better. But ultimately, I think Richmond see Josh Smiley as their big-bodied mid long-term. He's probably going to phase out some of those guys, and then they're going to kind of build around that in the next couple of drafts, how it's looking to me. But yes, as far as how Richmond's midfield is going to work in 2025, I don't think it's going to work well.
Yeah, I think that's part of the concern for coaches in the fantasy community, but also, as you mentioned, part of the excitement and the expectation for where it might be able to land as well for us from that perspective. Okay, so Smiley at 5. Now I reckon there's 3 names that I think people are like, oh yeah, I could see 2 of them coming a mile away. 1, I see the potential narrative if he goes where he goes. And then 1, I'm desperately waiting to see how Dylan's justified it. So we'll get to those names in a moment. But in at number 4, the best team in it, get in many people's eyes the best, safest, most bankable midfielder off the entire list. The Ashcroft boys, and Levi especially, he's going to be a decent fantasy and SuperCoach prospect for us, not just this year, but for many years to come.
Yeah, I think if you look back to a moment in the season, he was dominating junior footy just in general, and you always have those question marks. You're like, oh, how's he actually going to go at the top level? And then he steps into the Brisbane Lions VFL side and has 35 touches and kicks a goal. and then any doubts that you potentially had just sort of get wiped away there. I think, this feels like a lazy, like, I don't even know what to kind of say about Levi Ashcroft. He's just an unbelievably ruthlessly efficient player.
Yeah.
He doesn't, like, he's not that, this is going to sound bad, but he's not that enjoyable to watch.
I get that.
It's just sort of, it's power running, it's contest to contest. There's some really nice handballs in there, and filming him a lot throughout the season, I really noticed some of the intricate stuff that he does at stoppage. It's really creative and it's really nice, but you probably don't notice that with a wider view watching him. So he's not the one that sort of gets you excited, but I don't know. I just can't see him not having a 200 game career, just with how professional he is, how driven he is. He just, like, every single big game that we had throughout the season, he would just pop up in the exact moment. He gets his 30 touches. That's just an absolute minimum. And then he just does something, amazing at the end of the game, kicks the match-winning goal, whatever it is, and just comes back to that. The word that I always go with is ruthlessly efficient, because he's just inevitable at the end of the day. As far as, I suppose, like, if you want to play devil's advocate a little bit here and say, how could this potentially not work? The only thing is that he's walking into that Brisbane Lions team.
Yeah.
And the question that, us in the sort of media have is, how exactly is he going to fit into that side? I do see him as a very stay-at-home midfield type. So I don't see him as someone like a Finn O'Sullivan, where you could say, like, roll him across half-back. Like, potentially you could, but Brisbane are trying to win premierships too. They're not in a North Melbourne developmental stage where you're mucking around with players. Like, he really, if he plays, he has to come in and have an impact. Otherwise, he's taking somebody's spot. Yeah. I guess ultimately they're going to try to do what they did with his brother. They're quite similar players. They're going to, run him through with maybe 40% CBAs, something like that. Again, if he gets 40% CBAs, he's pushing someone out. He's pushing someone like a McCluggage out, or is it one of those guys like Rayner who comes in there and pinch hits? I think he can probably play as a half-forward flanker, a winger, when he's not doing that. That's the only question. I don't know if you want to weigh in on that at all, about where he actually fits into that Brisbane team. But yeah, that's the question mark. But if he plays, I think he's going to find the footy.
I think that's the beauty of him, isn't he? Much like his brother Will, who didn't exactly set the world on fire coming back from the ACL in terms of strong first choice inside midfielder. It was only really through the final series that he actually took over the games and sat through that midfield opportunity. Rather, like you said, it was coming off flanks, coming through as a third choice option, coming off the wing, and then being in and around the contest a little bit more. So I'm with you. I think the only thing that's going to stop Levi this year from being one of the best rookie options for us is positionally, he doesn't get the share, and just Neil's such a ball magnet. Dunkley, while not a high disposal guy, just finds a way to get involved with the football. McCluggage is a great transition player and scorer. Rayner's an impact guy. Zorko and Coleman coming off that half-back flank you'd expect, with Coleman coming back from ACL. It does feel like there's a lot of ball and not a lot of share, despite how good he can be.
100%. I think that, like, the obvious, if you looked for one player to target of like whose spot does he take, it's probably Jasper Fletcher.
Yeah.
Which is more of that wing role. You can't, like, as a first year wingman, like, you'd be absolutely an amazing season would be what, averaging 80 in AFL fantasy?
Maybe more likely 65, 70, 80 SuperCoach kind of range in terms of only outside, only transition scoring, despite him having that inside credibility and pedigree. Like you mentioned, Neil, Dunkley, McCluggage, Rayner, his brother in Will, all in and around as first touch players. Geez, it's hard to squeeze him out.
Yeah, and he'd be, that's the thing, like, if he was going to a Richmond, a North Melbourne, you'd be hard-pressed to not have him number one on the list.
Yeah, totally. I'm with you on that. And maybe he might be the long-term number one on the list. Who knows? I'll pick your brain on that in a minute. Number 3.
Yep.
Midfielder.
Yeah, again, a straight midfielder, someone that doesn't have a lot of positional flexibility that we talk about with this. And another one that's walking into a pretty strong team, someone that finished in the top 6 teams at the end of the season, or top 8 at least, teams in the season in Carlton. So he is walking into a pretty strong midfield. It's Jagga Smith, who is the ultimate accumulator, the ultimate ball winner. He had games throughout the season where he got 50 touches, 40 touches in 2 different games. And people forget these Coates Talent League games, they're shorter than AFL quarters. So it's shortened quarters and he's still able to find the football that much. This guy is an absolute loose ball freak, as in the ball gets tapped out, whether his team wins the hit out, he's getting the loose ball. Inevitably, he's getting it 70 to 80% of the time. He's just so good at that stoppage source, and then he creates by hand. So the one thing that I sort of, going into the draft, I was a little bit surprised by was the fact that Carlton drafted this guy, just in the sense that they've got Cripps, they've got Walsh, they've got guys that find the footy from stoppage. I would say that if there's one player in that midfield group that they're sort of missing, it's that real guy that drives the ball. It's that sort of, powerful, explosive forward of centre midfielder. And Jagga Smith is definitely not that. He's more of your traditional accumulator. He's sort of your banker midfielder, the guy that's just going to go in and, find the footy ultimately. I think a good player comparison at AFL level, as far as the movement that he shows and the ball winning side of it, is players like Nick Dacos, like Zach Butters, who just, really loose ball dominant players from stoppage. The one thing that I would say that Jagga has to work on in his game is that, ball progression. Because Dacos and Butters, they're both really penetrative by foot. Dacos has got that sort of, scalpel-like kicking. Jagga Smith doesn't really have the foot skills, so he's more doing what he does by hand. So he's going, like we saw him at the VFL, he averaged 27 disposals for Richmond's side playing against men. He looks skinny. He doesn't look ready for AFL football, but he is, because, and that, again, that's the loose ball dominant. It's the reaction speed. He gets to the ball before, and then he doesn't have to rely on that innate physicality of some other players. But my question marks on Jagga are just how he fits into this Carlton midfielder on a more like holistic level of how the whole thing works. But given the fact that they've come into the draft for him at number 3, they apparently wanted him. They had him rated as the number 1 player in the draft. I think they're going to play him. I think maybe this means that someone like an Adam Chera falls down the rungs a little bit and they give a little bit more opportunity to Jagga Smith. I still think the starting centre bounce is going to be Patrick Cripps. It's going to be Sam Walsh. It's going to be George Hewitt. Just on the balance of things, I think they need Hewitt as that more defensively minded mid. But Jagga's going to come in. He's going to do what he does, which is find the footy and, ultimately be a good, particularly be a good AFL fantasy player.
Yeah. Yeah, it does feel like he's going to do that. Is there a world where you see him spending the majority of time off the wings and half forward? First, again, they've got the Hollins brothers that play that role really nicely of linking up between the flanks. Do you see him kind of being a 5th choice option in at centre bounce, or just as you mentioned, just so many options that could run that through that depth for Carlton? Is it more likely to be coming from a flank and then getting involved through the midfield rather than starting at a centre bounce?
Yeah, honestly, with what I've seen from Jagga Smith throughout the entire season, he's just he doesn't have any sort of the skills to be able to play those higher positions, like those half forward roles or deep inside forward 50. He's not going to hit the scoreboard for you. He's so good at stoppage situations. That is his absolute strength. So I think if you play him, you're playing him as a midfielder. And if he's coming in off a half forward flank or off a wing, I think there's going to be better players that can do that, particularly the wing role. I think the wing role is really important, that you have that, elite pace and you have a little bit more dynamism and you can carry the ball a little bit further and you have that penetration by foot. And I think who they've got there, they've got players like Blake Acres and Ollie Hollins already sort of fulfilling those roles. I don't see Jagga as an upgrade on either of those coming off the wing. And they've sort of done, pretty well with their high half forwards that are coming up to stoppage. I think obviously they want to play this really heavy, dominant stoppage game. And what I think is Jagga's probably a part of that for them long term. So, Cripps, Walsh, Hewitt, maybe Jagga Smith's just the 4th guy. And it's really going to be all about whether he can kind of bet himself into the team. I off air before, we were talking about Riley Sanders. I probably see Jagga as a little bit of that, a similar situation this season where you've got this really stay-at-home kind of midfielder that's going into a good team. if he can break into the team and he can prove to the coach that he's in their best side as a midfielder, he's going to get in. But otherwise, I would say it's probably out of the team or in as a midfielder.
Yeah, it really is hard, not just in the team that he's in, but for first-year players as pure mids to impact. Like probably the most recent from a fantasy perspective we've seen was Will Ashcroft before he did his knee, was the guy that was averaging in and around that 80s to 90 marker across the formats as a pure out-and-out midfielder, but rather it's been the players scoring from transition, scoring from halfback in distributions, or pushing up from a flank and linking up in and around the grounds as a transition scorer. This is where our fantasy scoring has popped for first-year players anyway.
And the other one that's had impact, and not from a fantasy perspective, is Harley Reid.
Yeah,
that we talked about,
true.
But I think he's a bit of an enigma. He's a bit of a freak, and ultimately that didn't calculate into fantasy scoring, more of just impact on the game.
Yeah, no, it's SuperCoach. You got a couple of monster ceiling games out of him last year, but yeah, you're right. Yep. Definitely wasn't there. All right, and that's probably why the two that you've got are the right guys to put in there, because you've talked about that freedom of ball movement, opportunities inside that they've landed, and fantasy pedigree of a junior is where you've landed with the number 1 and the number 2 players. Number 2, listed as a defender, landed in a St Kilda to some by surprise, but for fantasy and SuperCoach players in 2025, Toby could be a pretty special player for us.
100%. I mean, this guy knows how to find the footy, and I have a bit of a theory that players coming into the AFL who are really strong endurance runners are the guys that fit in. Partly that's to do with positional flexibility, and they get those sort of outside roles that they're better suited to. Again, Toby Travaglia, he's a tall, sort of skinny looking kid, but he doesn't rely on physicality to actually come in and impact the game. Played VFL this season and averaged 18 disposals while he played that, 22 disposals at Champs, 24 disposals at Coates Talent League. He's 188 centimetres, so he's really good in the air as well. He's able to win the ball back off the opposition, and I think that's going to really help him bet into this St Kilda team, because you've got outgoings, players like Josh Battle. I think there's still a conversation about Jack Sinclair and Nasiah Wanganeen-Miller, or which one of those maybe comes into the midfield and gives a little bit more bite in there. So Travaglia's sort of got that option to be able to, potentially take a role like Battle was as a sort of medium intercept defender type player. But he's also got that offensive part of his game where he runs the wings and he's really outside. He's got that ball progression that you really want from a first-year player. And I think one thing that we have to acknowledge here with St Kilda is, from an outside player, a halfback flanker perspective, is how good of a team they were in 2024 at scoring in transition. One of the worst clearance sides going around. If you're a tackler, not necessarily as advantageous for you, but someone like Toby Travaglia comes into this St Kilda system. I just think the stars align here, and this one particularly from a fantasy perspective, this one just kind of works. I think he's going to get a lot of those, something that you don't get at junior level as much as those uncontested marks. Teams tend to flick, they sort of less go for those sort of lateral kicks, where they're just kind of feeling out the game. When you get to the top level, in some ways the game actually slows down in parts when you're trying to halt momentum and those sorts of things. So I think he's going to really benefit from those sorts of plays, and he's going to be surrounded by guys like Wanganeen-Miller, are some of the most exciting halfbacks in the competition. I just think he's going to thrive there.
Yeah, like if he's named round 1, and that's obviously a big if on a lot of these guys, but lock him in at D5, D6. This isn't just a put him on the bench and hope he generates you some cash. This is with confidence, obviously on the caveat of what we see through the preseason games. You can put this cash cow and this rookie on your field and your defensive lines for sure. Number 1, Dylan, surprising, because people go, who's the best fantasy prospect from here? People are going, it's got to be Jagga, just ball magnet, 120 galore across the formats. Oh, okay, maybe it's not Jagga. Okay, Travaglia, the defender. Sounds great. Okay, we'll lock that in. No. Maybe he's going to go Levi Ashcroft and give us the narrative that he's just going to be like his brother and a star and a stud. And even for me, until you said the name, I was like, I hadn't even considered him as the number 1 guy. And the moment you said his name, it all clicked. It unlocked the pathway of scoring. Talk us through the midfielder that's mid-eligible at the moment and the reason you've got this player at number 1 and the pathway for how he could be the best fantasy and SuperCoach scoring rookie for us for 2024.
So we're talking here Xavier Lindsay. I think first to acknowledge it's disappointing that we don't get defender status on this guy because he's played the position. All the communications at the moment coming out of Melbourne are that they have a juicy, beautiful, nice halfback role just sewn up for him, ready to play. We've already seen the move of Trent Rivers into the midfield. That's vacated that spot perfectly here for Xavier Lindsay. He averaged 24 disposals in the Coates Talent League. He averaged 23 in the National Champs. He was one of Vic Country's best players. He's a leader and playing as a centre bounce mid, those kind of numbers. What he can do at AFL level, I think, is not dissimilar to what someone like a Colby McKercher. He sort of paved the way last season for what Xavier Lindsay can do. A lot of people have compared Lindsay to Zach Merritt, just with the movement and the poise that he shows. Just imagine Zach Merritt back to his early stages of his career. Imagine him just getting a nice, juicy little half-back role where he can chip the ball around and score points like Harry Sheasel did. I just think this one, Xavier Lindsay, he's an accumulator. He's a ball magnet type midfielder as a midfielder. So if you get a sniff that one of those high pedigree players, someone that was drafted in the top 10, 15 players, gets a look, and particularly at a good side, like Melbourne, this isn't someone going into a bottom of the table side where they can't control the football. This one works. This one makes so much sense. And I think Xavier Lindsay could be the player that you have to have this season.
Honestly, Dylan's putting him on the radar for you early because we all fall into the trap, no matter how experienced a SuperCoach and a fantasy guy you are, go, oh, the guys that were in the top 5 of the draft that are mids, they're the best prospects to get. I'll grab them. I'll own them. But the pathway you've mapped out for us in terms of scoring pedigree, in terms of job security potential, in terms of training in the position, scoring proof in that position when he's had it, not just at the AFL level, and now the pathway to gaining dual position status. Man, the more we've talked, the more I'm with you. Xavier Lindsay's the number 1 cash cow to have in 2025. And it wasn't the guy I thought we'd be doing an hour ago.
Nah, he is absolutely it. And I think partly you go with a guy like Lindsay, like Travaglia, who have that flexibility. Most people are going to hear about the Jagga Smiths and the Josh Smileys, so they're going to be on everybody's radar. But I think what I'm looking at there is ceiling. Your Xavier Lindsay could be that guy that just freakishly averages 95 in like a rookie season. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's Sheasel, that's Dacos, that's distribution, that's run and carry, that's plenty of uncontested possessions, intercept touches, all of that with the junior pedigree off that distribution function off halfback. He's
actually played 100%, and he's actually played that role and succeeded in that role. And you look at, I think another thing about players betting into their AFL careers early that needs to be considered is how good their running patterns and their footy IQ is, what they do sort of off the ball to be able to open up those sorts of positions. And Xavier Lindsay is that guy. He's the guy that can consistently find the football. If he's in a poor side, if he's in a good side, he just gets it done.
Yeah, all right. So those are the 10. Kako, Berry, Langford, Draper, O'Sullivan, Smiley, Ashcroft, Smith, Travaglia, and Lindsay. That is the top 10 with a little bit of a notable admission to Bo Allen. I've got 2 questions before we need to let you go. In a moment, I do want to get you to future cast for me for keeper and dynasty coaches that really don't care about the salary cap side. They're thinking, how good could this player be in 3, 5, 10 years for fantasy prospects? Who's the next premium star that I want to get my hands on? I'll give you a few moments to marinate on that in the back of your mind while also asking you another question. Give me a few if this, then that's. And what I mean by that is you've given us a great list of players, but there's a lot of really talented options that have popped through, either positionally, either those that are the mature draft class or those that if one variable changes in the club they've been drafted to, they become drastically relevant for us in our starting squads or even through the season as they come in, and we need to look at them as downgrade options to be able to free up cash and keep that on the field. Who are some of these, if this pops, this one variable, then they become super relevant for us?
I've got one straight into my head there, which is pick 21 to the Sydney Swans, Jesse Detoli.
Nice.
And I think everything that I've heard out of Sydney, he started really hot in at pre-season. Again, some of this comes down to my philosophy in the sense that I think Sydney under Dean Cox are going to change things up a little bit. I think they're going to drastically move that forward line around. We've already seen rumours that McCartan's been playing as a key position forward. I think guys like McDonald, like Amati, those types are really in trouble for their positions, and they're going to be looking to go a little bit smaller. And I think that opens the door for someone potentially a round one debut to a Jesse Detoli, who is a guy that played for the Northern Knights, played for Vic Metro. He can play as that sort of small forward type player. He's a little bit of an aerial hybrid, a good marking target in the air for someone that's like 179 centimetres, but he can run through the midfield as well. I think if Jesse Detoli plays, I talked about your Joe Berries and your Isaac Kakos earlier. Detoli has more of a scoring pedigree than those players do. Those players didn't play midfield and rack up 35 disposals and kick 2 goals in the talent league like Jesse Detoli did. He's a super, super smart player, someone that's shown himself to be able to play positions like half back, through the midfield, and that sort of higher half forward type role. Beautiful kick, 2-footed player, someone that can kick the footy, 50 to 60 metres on his non-preferred foot, which is just incredible. He's an incredibly skillful player. And someone that plays with a real attitude. He's sort of got that a little bit of mongrel in him.
Mm. Yeah, nice.
And I really like that. And I think the Swans will like that as they try to kind of get this. They've kind of, they've turned into this sort of ball movement type team in the last few seasons. And I think Jesse Detoli will give them a bit of attitude. Playing is, most likely a high forward that comes and pinch hits in the midfield. But if he gets a sniff in round one, I swear, jump on.
Yeah, it's nice. Often we kind of look at the players in that second round that crop a little bit for us too, as kind of a little bit more value for us, where we know there's that cascading dollars of the first round. We kind of hit the second round, and we're venturing into that almost basement price cash cows. Is there anyone in that sort of second round, maybe the mid to latter parts of the second round, that you go, oh, if this pops for them, is there a name or two from the second round that might be a fantasy prospect for us that you can see?
100%. And I've looked at the midfield of West Coast over the last couple of seasons, and I think sort of counterintuitively almost, they've sort of built this midfield that's guys that can't accumulate the football. They actually, they lack getting their hands on the ball, and then they lack being able to control possession. So they've drafted a couple of later picks in the draft in Luca Grego and Tom Gross, who are more of those, like for their teams, at least in the Coates Talent League, they sort of acted as those more sort of accumulator type midfielders. Tom Gross has a very Callan Ward, Rory Sloane type look to him. The way that he plays, he's really hard, really contested in and under, but he racks up the footy more importantly. So I think to go along the likes of players like Harley Reid, Elliot Yeo, trying to think of Jinby, Hewitt. They're all sort of power athletes predominantly. So they don't have those guys that just sort of rack up 25, those consistent contest to contest type midfielders. So I think either Tom Gross or Luca Grego, probably more Tom Gross, who is the slightly more higher pedigree player. I think he could come into that midfield and actually sort of fulfill a positional need for them as well. You look back a little bit further, I think another player like that who actually has forward eligibility too is Hamish Davis to the West Coast Eagles. He was picked up really, really late, has that forward eligibility and can run through the midfield. Does he suit the absolute positional need for West Coast? Maybe not, and he's probably going to play as more of a forward and be more of a modest scorer, unlike Gross, but I think he really works. The other one is James Barrett to the Saints, who is probably, I talked about Toby Travaglia being able to fill that battle role. I think James Barrett's long-term the actual battle replacement if that makes sense. And Barrett's another one he's a weird positional player. He's like low 190s, so he plays as a key position player a lot, but he's also, he's played as a midfielder and stuff like that. He's got pretty good ground level skills. He's a pretty good running player, and he can kick the ball similar to someone like an Ari Schoenmaker in last year's draft, kick the ball nearly 70 metres on the run. So he's pretty dangerous. He's got defender and forward eligibility as well. So if any of those guys get a sniff, I'd be jumping on.
I like it. Well, mate, you've been an absolute star, giving us in the fantasy and SuperCoach community a better insight and understanding to the players, and not just going, oh, they're a mid, that must mean they're going to play a mid. You've helped us understand who they are, how they play, and a pathway where they could be SuperCoach and AFL fantasy relevant for us as salary cap or classic for us in 2025. But before I let you go, that the draft crop is outstanding in so many ways. And for those that play Dynasty and Keeper League, so they get to feel like they're in list management. They don't care about the salary cap. They're like, what is a player going to be like in 3, 5, 8 years' time? They're going to do their redraft. These players that you've mentioned are going to be high on that redraft board of, do they get the delisted guy and hope that 90 guy pops, or do they invest in the young star? That's always the dilemma in those early picks on a redraft for Keeper and Dynasty leagues. So rather than thinking about who's going to be the most impactful, which we've gone through today on this episode, who do you forecast in, let's say, 5 years' time, could be the most AFL fantasy and SuperCoach relevant in terms of being the out-and-out, potentially best scorers that we've got rolling around in the competition?
Yeah, I think still, I mean, you'd probably, if you wanted to look at who was going to be the best fantasy options, you'd actually probably look at rucks on some level with how things have gone with rucks sort of dominating the game. But I think the next group of players I look at are those sort of engine midfielders, the ones that are less impact per possession, but they create by hand, and they're really good at getting their hands on the ball from stoppage. So the one that jumps out to me, again, it's going to sound like a pretty boring answer, but if you're looking for that legacy option, you can't really go past a Jagga Smith. I think the other one in that bracket is Levi Ashcroft. They're the pretty generic mids, but they're the highest footy IQ players, and they just consistently get their hands on the ball, and they get their hands on the ball from stoppage. So particularly Jagga Smith there, I think it's such a sustainable way of playing where you can just walk into centre bounces, you can walk into stoppages, and more often than not, you're going to win the ball. And then you can link up for those 1-2s, get double possessions. You know, they get around the ground, they take those uncontested marks. You think about players in the past like this, Caleb Sarong sort of fits into that bracket, Andy Brayshaw. They just find the footy, they're smart, they use it pretty well. They're not maybe the best player on the team as far as the most important. They're not the Dustin Martin that's going to kick 4 goals one-on-one in the goal square in a grand final, but they just keep going and they just keep getting it done.
Yeah, all right. Well, there you go. Keeper coaches, Dynasty League coaches. You got maybe pick 1 or pick 2 in your upcoming redraft. Dylan's given you a couple of guys that have pedigree, performance, and certainly a clear pathway in time to definitely be up there. By the way, I'm exactly the same on my 1 and 2. If someone said you got pick 1 and 2 in a brand new Keeper League, who you doing? It's Jagga and Levi for me, 100%. Totally with you on that. Hey, mate, you're a star. It has been a privilege to have you on this episode. You've given not just the fantasy community, but the AFL landscape some great insight and understanding, not only on this current draft crop, how they sit in the AFL system, and also some real excitement about what you're going to be doing on your channel. Tell us about where people can get in touch with you and see some of the great work you're doing in the AFL media landscape.
Yeah, so currently on YouTube and Instagram. So Dylan Alexander Follows Draft. Not too much of a creative name there, but you can find me on either of those. Particularly YouTube's probably the place where I'm putting out the most amount of content, and then Instagram's sort of just a bit of a feeder, kind of goes down from there. But catch me on there. Thanks for having me on again today, MJ. Really appreciate it, and fulfilled a childhood dream of coming on a fantasy podcast.
We got you on the coaches panel, mate. Who knows, maybe as the pre-season goes along, we might come back and revisit this list then once we've got a little bit more pre-season information. If you missed any of those links of where you can keep in touch with Dylan, we've got them in the description of this episode, so you can go and check that out. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you haven't followed us across social media, all the details for us alongside Dylan, you can find in the description of this episode. If you watch this on YouTube, let us know. You can get in touch with us with all the details on YouTube. Just simply search for Coaches Panel. You'll find us there. Make sure you subscribe. This episode, along with every single other episode we do, is available as an audio podcast. You can go and check that out. And then don't forget, from January 1, it goes absolutely ballistic here at the Coaches Panel. I've put together a list of who I believe are the most relevant players across SuperCoach, Dream Team, and AFL Fantasy. It's a player per day. It's a video and an episode with many fans from the Coaches Panel and also from the fantasy football and AFL media community. It's put together a list of who I think are the most relevant players for us in 2025. It's not just a random player a day. It is ranked into relevance. And it's a conversation we cannot wait to have with you. It all gets underway January 1. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in. We can't wait to be chatting with you about your AFL Fantasy Supercoach Dream Team and Keeper sides in 2025 real soon.